Hi, we continue in 2 Samuel 19 today as David is found mourning for his son Absalom, and Joab and the people respond to their king, seeming to forget that they've sacrificed their lives and risked everything to protect him from the rebellion. So as we pick up here in verse 5, as you can see on the left side of the screen, noting as I did last time that the Hebrew Masoretic text and the English are off one verse. There is no 19:1 in the Hebrew, so they're off one verse. So 19:5 in the English is 19:4 in the Hebrew, and we'll be following that as we go. So we're picking up here, and we'll look at this paragraph here with Joab, and we'll look at the beginning of the people responding before we see David actually respond as we continue. Noting, as I did last time, that after the chiasm that opens the scene here, we see the key word day and today, yom, many times, but also people. And I really want to emphasize that because the New RSV inexplicably often translate officers, commanders, troops, and soldiers when the word is am. 21 times in the chapter we hear am, the people. So there is no professional military described. The only exception is in verse 6 in the English, as we'll see, where sar expresses commanders. Oddly, because officers is usually the word for sar, but here officers is simply people. So New RSV, for whatever reason, suggests that David has something like a professional modern military, but it's not that. It's simply the people. And what we're going to look at is the question of the people of Judah, the people of Israel, or are there just people of David who are neither one of those that are involved? Is this about national security, or is it simply about David? Maybe it's about both, as we see. The personal is political. So we begin here. Joab came into the house to the king. And remember that, as we noticed last time, we're in Mahanaim, on the other side of the Jordan. And it'll come up later in the chapter, and the next chapter is escorting the king back to Jerusalem, crossing the Jordan in a ritual echoing what we saw in Joshua after Moses' death, and they enter in the first time. So we see also that slaves is used constantly. And Norsvi again translates as servants often, or sometimes as people, what is slaves, even officers. Here, this is officers, but it's not officers, it's slave. I really want to highlight that because this is a monarchy where the people who work for the king are not simply employees, but they're slaves. That's the social situation of this, and there's no reason to pretend it's something other than that. So let's jump right into our story. So Joab comes into the house. He decides to make this his issue, that he's responsible for getting David to wake up and return, whether that's because he feels loyalty to the people who worked under him or because he wants to protect David against himself isn't clear. Joab's motives are often unclear. And as we noted last time, it's a real question of whether these sons of Zeruiah, of whom Joab is one, are too violent for David in the sense they really are more violent, or whether that's propaganda that he's trying to deflect the responsibility onto them. We can judge that for ourselves as we continue to look at this scene and what happens in the aftermath. So it comes into the house. We don't know what house this is, but it's in Mahanaim, and said, today, and we note it's 5 times in Joab's speech in these next verses in the English, the Masoretic text, the next verses down. You have covered the shame, and covered is being provided here. We saw that David covered his face in verse 4, but there is no word for covered. Literally, you could say he shamed the faces of your slaves, but covered is provided. So we noted that they were ashamed. They stole in the city's people as if they were people who were ashamed. And now Joab is naming it out loud. Your people you've made them ashamed. Instead of being proud that they protected you, now they're ashamed. And what are they ashamed of? That they saved your life. And as my note below has, the word for saved here, MLT, is impossible to pronounce without the vowels, is only here in verse 10, in the English, and verse 9 in 2 Samuel. There's not much about saving, ironically compared to David's own saving of the people, as we'll see in verse 9 below. And we see how many times it was in 1 Samuel, the question of saving, but only here and at the very beginning in 2 Samuel. But an interesting thing he follows up, and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your women and your secondary women, as I translate down here, not as concubines, which is unnecessarily pejorative. And that's interesting. Why were they at risk? When Absalom killed Amnon for raping his sister Tamar, he gathered all the king's sons, and David heard the rumor that all the king's sons were killed, but it was only Amnon that was killed. We have no reason to think that Absalom has hostility against his other brothers and sisters. It could be argued that he is trying to consolidate, would have consolidated his reign by killing any rivals, but we've not heard that he sensed that they were rivals, but certainly not the daughters were not rivals. There'd be no reason for Absalom to kill his sisters. which would presumably include Tamar, although as I noted back in chapter 13, the text never says that Tamar is actually David's daughter, although it does say that she's Absalom's sister. So is this just rhetorical excess on Joab's part, or does he have some reason to think that Absalom would have killed all of David's family, including his women, which presumably includes his own mother and the secondary women? We can't tell whether that was Absalom's intention that Joab knows, or he's just trying to use everything he's got to get David to wake up. And then he engages in a really powerful rhetorical statement that the New RSV, as it rarely does, keeps the chiastic shape of, for love of those who hate you and for hatred of those who love you. And it's a strong language that it can possibly be here. And my note has preserved the chiasm. So love, ahav here, is a number of times, and we see it here as the last time in 2 Samuel. For love of those who hate you, which presumably was Absalom. Hate is not in 1 Samuel. We've seen it a couple of times. And here, in 2 Samuel 13, it was around Absalom's hate for his brother Amnon, which makes perfect sense. We see it here. It'll be a couple of more times. And for hatred of those who love you, suggesting that he hates those who protect him. I note again, as I've noted before, that in the Hebrew, as well as in the Greek of the New Testament, love and hate are not emotions as they are in English, but ends of a spectrum of attraction or repulsion. So to love somebody in that sense is to cling to them, to have them be close to you, to be concerned with them, and hatred is to reject them completely. It may or may not have an emotional component. It may just be a rational decision to separate yourself out from people, and that could be called hatred. So if that's the sense, he's alienated himself from the very people who've risked their lives to protect him. And he continues, you've made it clear today, or have you declared today, and commanders and officers just wrong. Officers and slaves, as I translated over here, as you can see, officers and slaves are nothing to you. For I perceive, or literally I know, omitting another yam today, as I have here, for I know that if Absalom were alive today, which I supply, and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased, the New RSV has, or as I put it more correctly, this would be right in your eyes. A phrase that we see regularly for people doing things that are not necessarily connected with Yahweh's will, but on their own. Is that really the truth? Would it be that David would find it right in his eyes if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead? What we heard David say, as you can see on the right side of the screen, is his cry was, would that I were dead and Absalom was alive. But whether he meant that or not, it's hard to know. But Joab makes it sound like David would be pleased if everybody else were dead and Absalom was alive. That certainly can't be the case. It's certainly got to be the case that David knew Absalom would die, that he sent them out, and whether his grieving is real or not, that he is pleased that Absalom is dead because now he's king. And it was a choice that he obviously made in resisting Absalom's popular appeal in the first place and allowing it to build to where it did. So having assessed the situation that way, now Joab goes out and makes a demand on him. As Falcom notes, in the larger chiasm, which I won't put up here, that Falcom sees in the big picture, Joab seeks to make David appear publicly, while on the other side, Hushai sought to keep him hidden amidst the Absalom situation. So go out at once, or literally now stand up and come out. And we'll notice the standing up and sitting down that comes out here. So it's not just go out, it's stand up. And throughout the Hebrew Bible, standing up means to take a stand. It literally can mean obviously getting up from a sitting position, but it also means, as it does in English, to take a stand, to have a position. So take a stand and come out and speak kindly, or literally speak to the hearts of your servants, recalling that Absalom stole the hearts of your servants, or literally your slaves here, not your servants. So speak to their hearts, get to where their decision-making is. And as I've noted a number of times, the heart in the Hebrew Bible sense is not the place of emotion, but the place of decision. Trying to get them to speak directly to their hearts, to get them to recognize that David is pleased with what they've done. And Joab continues, for I swear by Yahweh, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night. Notice that contrasting with this day and this night, and recalling its inverse in 17:8 and 9, which is the other side of the chiasm. Let's go back and look at that now. So Hushai continued, you know your father and his men are warriors, speaking to Absalom, of course, and they're engaged. Your father is an expert in war, and he will not spend the night with his people, not with his troops. So Hushai's advice there is chiastically paired here with Joab's advice that if you don't do this, you're going to lose everybody. And this will not be worse for you than any disaster. It'll be a greater evil, literally, and this evil more than all the other evil. There is no verb in the Hebrew there. So as you see on the right side, in this evil more than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. And the word for youth, not just na'ar, youth as a noun, but your youth, Noraim here, recalls the initial call of Goliath, a warrior, since that David was a warrior since his youth in the face of Goliath. And we saw it only once previously for Samuel's leadership there since his youth. So recalling the entire journey of David, this would be the worst thing ever, and it would be, because he would lose everything that he's risked his life for. He's already lost 2 sons and a daughter to rape, and he would lose everything here. So in the face of that, we have to wonder, what is David thinking? He's not called here, as I noted last time. King is a key word here. So many times, over 60 times in the long chapter, in his role as king. So the king literally stood up and sat down. He stands up and takes his seat in the gate. Again, the gate of Mahanaim, not the gate in Jerusalem. After mourning his dead son, as my note below has, David in contrast to Eli, who fell off his seat when his son is killed in battle. And it also recalls where Absalom began his rebellion in 2 Samuel 15:2. He stood in the road beside the gate, seeking to generate that sense of justice in the gate. So David takes his seat in that place, although not in Jerusalem, and the people were told, "Behold, the king is sitting in the gate," suggesting that he's now ready to take his place as king again. And all the people came before the king, or literally before the king's face, as I have it over here. Meanwhile, although meanwhile is not in the Hebrew there, all the Israelites had fled to their tents. Homes is terrible there because tents is the key word. We see it here as we saw it earlier. We'll see it in chapter 20 with the call for rebellion. And most importantly, we'll see it in 1 Kings 12 in the generation after Solomon when the United Kingdom is divided and all Israel flees to their tents with the same battle cry we'll see Sheba express in the beginning of the next chapter 20. So what is that telling us here? All the people came before the king, but the Israelites had fled. In other words, the Israelites don't trust that David will protect them. They had sided with Absalom, and now they're going back to their tents, back to that symbolic sense of the pre-monarchical situation. And the text now shifts from Joab's point of view to the people's point of view. And it's a fascinating scene, and we'll see another one like it at the end of the chapter when Israel and Judah have a conversation in the first person singular, talking about the future. So we'll see a couple of those here. Assessing the national mood. As my note below has, the Israelites and perhaps the Judahites as well must certainly have considered the possibility of anointing another person as king. And as Falcom adds, that same crowd which had rejected David now makes a radical and total volte-face, about face. And let's hear what they say. All the people were not disputing, but seeking justice. And that's how I translated it, as you can see on the other side here. They're seeking justice throughout all the tribes of Israel. Which, if we take it literally, means traveling all around the land, and that would take a long time and have a long conversation. This is told that it's all happening this day. As you can see below, as it continues down below, we're still talking about the same one day. So this is an artificial insertion here, suggesting that this conversation, which would have to take place over weeks and months, is assessing the national mood here. It's something in our world might happen on social media, on TikTok, or some other place like that, where you can assess how people are feeling about what the president or other people have done. But they don't have social media, they've just got this text instead. So this is what we hear them say. And before we do, let's just note the presence of the tribes of Israel in the books of Samuel. I won't go back over all of this I did before. We see the issue Shevet for tribe 190 times in the Masoretic text, but let's just focus on the phrase tribes of Israel. So beginning in 1 Samuel, we saw the call of the tribes of Israel around priesthood. But we see it where Saul claims, "I'm only a Benjaminite from the least of the tribes of Israel." Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, and the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot so that Saul would be made the king. And now when Samuel rejects Saul in the name of Yahweh, we hear, "Are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? Yahweh anointed you king." But then we hear the tribes of Israel come to David after Saul's death and say, "We are a bone in your flesh." And as we looked at it then, whether they're really claiming kinship, whether they're claiming in desperate situation that's in Saul is dead and we're afraid of you. Please take us in and don't destroy us. So we see that what we see in our passage in chapter 19 has the seeds of it planted all the way back in chapter 5. The tribes of Israel were never really on David's side, but under the situation they were in, felt compelled to. And when Absalom sent out messengers in chapter 10, they all sided with Absalom. So we see back to our current situation, but we'll see in the next chapter, Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel, and they followed Sheba. So we know the tribes of Israel are not loyal to David at this point. So let's hear what they discuss among themselves. One group says, omitting again, behold, the king delivered us, using nitzal here in the hifal form, used parallel with here, the king delivered and saved us. And we see nitzal in this form in 2 Samuel back to chapter 12 after the Uriah situation. We saw it in the woman of Tekoa situation, her story. We see it here and we'll see it in the next chapter. But it won't be again in the monarchy story until 2 Kings 17. There won't be any question of being delivered until then. So notice the parallel. The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. A little poetic parallel there. And now he has fled out of the land because of Absalom, using two different words for fleeing in this chapter and in this verse rather than the previous verse. Barak here, not like the former president of the United States, it's from a different language. Different from verse 8, Nas. But we're calling 15:14 and Absalom fleeing after the death of Amnon. So now their perception is he has fled because of Absalom. And so what about that? But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, noting a Messiah making that was not previously narrated. If we look back in 5:17, we can see the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel. That's the only other reference to an anointing. We had not heard about this anointing. But it doesn't claim it was from Yahweh, that they simply anointed Absalom himself. So Absalom's anointing as Messiah does not have Yahweh's backing. It has the backing, though, of the people of Israel. But now he's dead in battle. And they ask the rhetorical question to each other, now therefore, why do you say nothing, speaking to each other, about bringing the king back, or literally returning the king? And it's a use of return here that we see is a key word throughout this section. So we could see in the purple here, return, return, return. And that's the question that will take up this chapter and the next chapter, is whether the king will return to Jerusalem, and if he does, who's on his side. So after hearing Joab push him, and whether David hears it or not, we hear it, Israelites disputing of what the justice is here with Absalom dead and the king having fled, we'll see David move into action in the next scene. See you for that next time. Bye-bye.